All right. Good morning, good afternoon, everybody. We'll go ahead and jump in here and start this webinar off. Before I do, real quick though, I do want to do a little bit of housekeeping. So I will be recording this webinar. We'll make that available on our YouTube page and in our website. So that'll be available within the next week or so. If you have questions or comments or anything as we go through, drop them in the chat, drop them in the Q&A, and we'll try to get you answers as we go. And then all of the slides and the recording that'll be made available pretty quickly afterwards. So we'll get slides to you guys along with a link to a quiz out to the emails you guys use to register within a day or so. I'll probably actually get that out today. So if you are new to Teams and English is not your native language, you are able to also translate the content on the slide to a few different languages. So there's a button that says more up on the top there. If you go to that, there's some translation options under there. So we'll go ahead and dive in here. So today we're going to focus on 6 different updates and new products from last year. A lot of this today will lean a bit into the technical side of things, not so much clinical. But before I jump into it, I want to mention that I'm only talking about 6 things, but we do constantly make changes and improvements to products. Usually there's several hundred of those changes a year, but that could be something like we adjusted the length of a bolt or added a nylon patch to that bolt, right? Things that are relatively minor, but should improve your interaction with the product, should improve its performance, things like that. So those are pretty mundane, and we don't have time to cover a few hundred things, so we're not going to talk about that today. We'll try to look at some of the bigger additions and changes from last year. So we'll start things off with some updates that we made to the Stealth cushion line last year. So the big thing that happened was back in April, on 4 of our cushions, we started allowing the choice between the original Sunmate FRG or a Visco elastic foam topper. The Premier, the Spectrum Foam, Spectrum Gel, and the Zen are the 4 cushions that up until last year automatically came with a Sunmate FRG as the top material, right? So the topper that you actually sit on. But our other cushions aren't affected by this. They have a more memory foam style foam on top or no foam. So it's just these 4. And let's see here. There we go. We're looking at these 4 cushions with the change. Both the Spectrums, the Premier, and the Zen. The Premier is a positioning cushion. It has some high-density foam wedges built into the very bottom of it that are meant to offload the ITs, but it also now has that option of Visco or FRG for the topper. You get some skin protection qualities out of that cushion as well because of that. So the Spectrum cushions both have a well with either a gel or a multi-layer foam insert to help relieve pressure under those ITs. You got a high-density foam base around that well that's meant to help hold the pelvis in place since those ITs are suspended into that well some. So other than that, it's only a pretty mild contour of the cushion. And it is skin protection and positioning here because you are in that well, plus you have a Visco or now FRG topper to choose from. The big thing with those cushions, though, is you have up to 650-pound capacity on those. The Spectrum foam would be your 650-pound capacity, and you can get up to 32 inches wide off the shelf. The Zen is more or less our general use cushion, but this time it's got a Visco elastic foam topper for added skin protection properties. So that's your quick review of those 4 cushions. But to dive in a little deeper, why would I choose FRG or why would I choose a Visco topper? So when you look over the data sheets and the materials, They're very, very similar products. So some of what I'm about to go through is is sort of like splitting hairs to some degree, right? But with the density and the firmness here, these two materials are very similar to each other. The Visco toppers will be just slightly less dense than FRG toppers. Um, but don't confuse density with firmness, right? Density doesn't always equal firmness in the foam world. Density is just how much foam material is packed into a given volume of space. Um, Indentation load deflection, or IFD, is a measurement of actual firmness of the material. And in that case, the two materials measure out to be identical to each other. Where they do differ more, though, is in flexibility. So how that material stretches and moves and conforms to load. So visco foam will be a little bit better at resisting tearing when it's stretched, but when a foam is loaded, FRG is a bit more conforming to that load. So on paper, both materials are rated for same temperatures and moisture resistance, but it's been our observation that FRG is less responsive to temperature changes. So those materials maintain their properties and remain unchanged for longer with swings in temperature, right, compared to the visco. And it does seem to resist water penetration better because it's got graphite in there that repels water. Though on paper it's rated for the same, right? So what does all of that mean? I know I just spouted out a lot. So what you can kind of say here is if the client performs frequent side transfers, I would suggest using the Visco topper. It's going to resist tearing better than the FRG. Um, but if they're not doing a lot of side transfers, if they're getting picked up out of their chair in a Hoyer lift, or if they're just doing a stand pivot transfer kind of situation, things like that, FRG is going to conform to that load a little better than the Visco will. If that client has very pronounced and bony ITs, especially on like the Spectrum cushions where you're sitting inside of a well, I would suggest your Visco again because it resists that tearing a little better than FRG will. But when they're in that climate that maybe they're seeing bigger temperature swings, maybe they're seeing something where they're inside where it's nice and warm, but then I go outside where it's snowing outside and super cold, right? FRG is going to continue to perform a little more consistently for longer in those temperature swings. So, of course, everybody's bottom is different. Everybody prefers the feel of specific materials differently than each other. So client preference is going to play a huge part of this. And I guarantee there will be people who break these rules of thumb that I just laid out here on this slide. So that is my suggestion as you guys start learning the differences between the materials is these should be good rules of thumb to start with until you get a good feel for them. Now, I put this slide here just to highlight a little bit more on the paperwork side of things. This change did mean that we needed to update our part number structure to allow you to select the different toppers. Don't try to memorize this, but if you were familiar with old part number structures, there was a change last year. The other thing that this change, though, did let us do that I hope you guys will feel good about and care about is it allows us to reduce the number of lines on the order. So now that part number lets us tell, just for the liners, for example, if I want a polyurethane liner, urethane liner, or no liner, it's encompassed in that single line item part number. So helps us at least drop it, a line or two off the quotes and the order confirmations. So when you're going through and doing paperwork for funding and stuff like that, just one less line to have to justify, right? Not a big deal for just a single cushion order, but when you're talking a whole power chair where there's pages of line items, that's kind of helpful. So now we are looking at more updates into the cushion line in the near future. This is the one we got through last year. There are several projects we're working through and looking at into later this year, early next year. So keep an eye out here on our cushion line. It is going to continue to grow and evolve and change in things in the near future. Now, moving on here, we'll take a quick look at our back support that we launched in August. It's our active posture back support under our ADI family. So this ADI active posture back, it's a mild contoured back that's really helped to meant to reinforce that user sitting position and posture. It's a mostly flat back, which has some contouring through some bolt-on contour supports. We'll look at those here in just a second. But for those of you who maybe remember our Diego system that we've had for a few years now, this has a pretty similar overall design to that back support. So the contour supports here, let's see, it's these guys right here that I'm talking about, these little lateral support looking things. So those contour supports provide some like posterior lateral support to that client. They give you about a 2-inch overall depth in the shape of this shell. And they're independently height adjustable and width adjustable. To some degree, you're able to also play with a little bit of angle on these, though not very much. There's room in the adjustment to have these set asymmetrically. All right, so you can offset them both to one direction and have a bit of a lateral offset as well in the width. And the same goes for height adjustment. You can adjust these in about the bottom 2/3 of the overall height of that back. So in that bottom 2/3, you can be asymmetric. So these contour supports, they can also serve as the mounting point for thoracic lateral hardware, or you can mount your thoracic lateral hardware on that flat section of shell, use both of those supports independently of each other and things like that. So all of that adjustability and things, we try to build that in so this can be super customizable, so it can support each person very individually. But who is that person, right? That's maybe a good question to answer now. So the clients who we're targeting with this particular style of back support, first and foremost, they're a client who requires a solid back. But to take it further, the contour supports, as well as the ability to adjust the lateral support and add lateral support, it makes it a good choice for somebody who might have just a slightly asymmetric sitting posture or maybe a little bit of stability issue when they are seated in their system. These clients might need something that provides some support and improvement to that trunk, the pelvic positioning, things like that to improve stability and limit the asymmetry that they might exhibit. And last, this back can help to increase pressure distribution across more of the posterior trunk, especially when you start comparing it to like a sling or cloth back for sure. Now, there's some case to be made here on the weight of this back support too. It's a relatively lightweight back for being a solid back. It's got plenty of adjustability built into it, and that overall weight does, though, depend on size and hardware selection and what else you bolt onto it for sure. But a 14 by 14 back, right, kind of in the middle of the size range we offer. We'll look at that size range in just a second. It, with mounting hardware included, it'll be about a 4-pound back. So the back itself, without hardware, is like 2.5 to 3 pounds, depending on the size. So it's a very lightweight system for, like I said, a solid metal backrest. And this back is rated up to a 300-pound weight capacity. The foam we use is very similar to our ADI foam. So if you guys know that, it's the same foam we use there. You have 1.25 inches total. There's a 1/4 inch of closed cell foam. This is a little different than like our custom seating closed cell foam. It's more spongy, so it conforms to the shape and contour of that back support better. It masks those transitions over like the openings of the contour supports pretty well. And it decompresses very well when it's unloaded. And then we use a medium density and firmness open cell foam here. It's soft enough to allow for some immersion into it, and still dense enough though to give you some support. So you have the same style cover as most of our other back supports do nowadays, with a cool core contact face. You get Velcro loop on the backside, all of that. So if it shifts too much, you can throw in as much Velcro as you need in there. The honeycomb on the upper and lower flaps help hold it in place, and then you have straps there too to help as well. So we do have a zipper flap on the bottom, so that you can add privacy flaps on this thing as well if you needed one. Now, options wise, we do have far fewer options here than we may be used to with the typical offering from Stealth. We only have 5 widths and 6 heights to choose from. So a 10 wide up to 18 wide and 10 to 20 tall, all in even numbers only here. You can order this without hardware, or you can select it with one of a few different hardwares we offer here. And this is a between the cane size back, right? It's meant to be able to fit between the uprights and let you maximize that seat depth and back angle adjustability on like a fixed upright manual, for example. So when you order it, just know that, that 14 wide back, we call it a 14 because it fits on a 14 wide chair. And it has an available trunk width and everything that's going to be close to 14. In this case, it'll be just a bit narrower than 14. So when you get into trying to spec one out and sizing it, we do have some reference material for you for that. Now, before I give a quick update on what's new with Epic Seating, our next topic here, I did want to give a quick reminder. I am going to have a webinar that dives super deep on this in, I think, a couple months here. I know that not everybody's seen it yet, though, so I'll start with just a quick overview of what this system is, just to make sure we kind of have a baseline of what we're looking at before I tell you what's new about it within this last year. So first and foremost, Epic Seating, we consider it to be a postural management system, and it's going to introduce postural variation or movement through an active or passive setting that you can do on those levers there. So the typical posterior back support and recline function, we take that and we split that into 2 sections, an upper and a lower section. That lower section is going to be a fixed segment. It's going to give you some pelvic stability, right? It's going to lock that pelvis in place. And then that upper section is an articulating segment that allows for some thoracic extension. The upper can be adjusted for posture, for comfort, for function, all in a more anatomically appropriate manner than the typical recline might do. And it can allow that user to move around in the system as well in a bit more controlled manner. So when we look at Epic in that active setting, so where we lock those levers in a closed position, like that right there, that active position will allow that client to relax those postural muscles. It'll provide an opening or articulating posterior thoracic support. And when it's all set up properly, when you relax into that system, when you relax your postural muscles, the system relaxes with you, right? Using it like that, we may look at a client who just simply needs to be able to move in their wheelchair. Maybe they need that ability without having to communicate that to a caregiver, things like that. And it's going to allow that user to choose the direction, the amount of movement, all of that, and when it occurs on their own. When we look at it in more of a static setting, it's going to allow for super easy adjustment to clients who have little movement or need for accommodating posture, right? That might be a user who may not require movement, but they need to adjust for their positioning throughout the day, their comfort throughout the day. Maybe it's a user with certain kinds of flexible kyphotic postures, right? You can position them so their trunk is more expanded and extended in their seating system. And maybe it might be somebody who's got a fixed kyphosis or lordosis, where you can have them sat in the chair and looking a little bit more out and about. So you do have about 14 degrees of range of articulation here. That average healthy adult population has about 15 degrees of extension in the section that moves here in their spine. So we try to protect from allowing somebody to go too far, and you can limit that range in both directions in 2 degree increments. So you can stop them from coming completely vertical or going all the way back 14 degrees. So there's two forces of struts to choose from right now. And we've designed it so that we base that selection more off use case rather than basing it off user weight or specific diagnoses and things like that. So 50 newtons is what we would use more for somebody who's got like normal or limited active movements. Maybe it's somebody who goes into a posterior pelvic tilt, but otherwise is somewhat typical. We kind of use that 50 Newton to allow somebody to relax those postural muscles and provide an articulating posterior support while they do that. You can also use it for manual adjustment and accommodate some of those like kyphoses and things like that who might have some active movements. Your heavier strut, your 100 Newton though, that's more ideal for your like highly active movement, right? So tone, dystonic users who might have a spastic extension pattern. They're going to give you that articulating point, but it's also going to absorb a lot of the energy that you get put into the system through that increased tone. So movement here is part of being a human, right? We all move in a lot of different ways to account for different functions and things that we engage in throughout the day. And a client in a wheelchair is no different. Their movement, though, is often inside of that restrictive seating system, and that's going to compromise a lot of things in their body, right? You get a lot of shearing. You might damage equipment if there's uncontrolled tone patterns, right? All of that's going to lead to an increase in certain behaviors, required increased levels of caregiver involvement and stuff like that. And so epic seating can kind of counteract a lot of those different things. Now, we can't really box epic seating into different diagnoses categories. It's a lot more broadly applicable than many of our other client or our other products. So somebody who's in a manual tilt could benefit from this, right? We have the ability to bolt it onto many different manual wheelchairs, and I'm about to cover some of that. We are also able to help balance somebody's head over their shoulders a little better just by opening this up. Somebody who might have a more compromised respiratory system with a more open trunk cavity, you're able to inflate those lungs better. And we've been able to show pretty quickly that you're getting better oxygenation when you open that person up. So there's a lot of different applications that you can use this for, right? In your client, you might have less engagement of those postural muscles, so they're able to relax and focus on other things rather than keeping themselves upright. Again, improved breathing and digestion, better head control, right? And then we have shown a pretty big reduction in the need for secondary supports. So if you have somebody in a long-term skilled care facility where that, pelvic belt, for example, is considered to be a restraint, epic seating has been a pretty interesting thing that has locked people's pelvis in place without strapping them down. So it's been pretty helpful there as well. So real quick, posterior pelvic tilt here is a pretty common thing that we're looking to correct with epic seating. Epic seating promotes correction of that through stabilizing that pelvis. With use of secondary with the use of that secondary posterior support, but then allowing the thoracic section to extend. When your thoracic support is moved rearward of that pelvic support, it's going to promote a little bit more natural and neutral pelvic tilt. You get a little bit higher lumbar lordosis. Both of those are going to counteract that posterior tilt. For our individuals with a kyphotic posture, it might also benefit them. Um, we're able to balance their head a little better by the rear offset of that thoracic segment, right? We still support their pelvis when we do this. We don't negatively influence the pelvis, and things like that. So what's new? So that let's talk about that now. So what's new within the last year? We can now mount to several additional models of tilt and space manual chairs, right? So here in the U.S., we can now do the Fuse T50 from PDG, and the Freedom Pro CG is another one we can do, that is new within the last year. There's a few different international frames as well for our international attendees. We've got a much broader selection of frames that we can mount to. The big thing, though, is that these new options also have a new method to attach to the wheelchair. So the original method meant that we unbolted your upright canes or push handles and bolted a tube in its place, a short little, like 10-inch tall tube. This new style, we remove the receiver from the frame altogether, and we attach directly to the wheelchair frame with a plate. That new method allows us to bump the weight capacity up to 300 pounds if the chair goes that high, right? Instead of the 250 that we had on the tube styles. So we do gain some weight capacity there. It is a little easier, and just like with the tube style, all of this can go back to stock OEM settings or configuration if Epic seating doesn't work out. So we're not cutting or modifying any part of the chair that in a way that it can't go back, to how you got it from the factory. And I do have it grayed out here, and I'm definitely showing it on the slide and in the picture. But we're going to be releasing an option to add Epic seating on a quantum tilt only very soon. So be on the lookout for more info on that one soon, coming soon. So that's more of a teaser right now. But before I move on from Epic, I do want to mention again, I believe it's in March, I'll have a webinar covering this in a lot of minute detail, right? So if you want to learn more info about Epic seating, just join us on that one, and we'll dive headfirst into Epic on that webinar. So another new item for us here is our flip down knee adductor. So our flip down knee adductor is really designed to offer a ton of adjustability and versatility and make it simple to tailor that positioning for the person. We're going to use Unilink technology for the flip down mechanism, so that with a very simple push of that little red button there, this support will flip down forwards or backwards and get fully out of the way. We've got a lot of different attachment options, to keep it secure and stable, and it makes it a good choice because of that for different styles of bases, brands, things like that. So like I said, we have a ton of adjustability here. It allows you to fine tune height, angle, depth, and we have multiple lengths and pad styles available. So it can really be matched to each client's needs in that specific system they're sitting in. But now this is a knee adductor, so it's meant to really focus on improving lower limb positioning. As a result, hopefully give you better weight bearing, seated stability. It'll give you that lateral boundary for pelvic and lower extremity alignment, hopefully preventing excessive abduction at hip joints. But because this one flips straight down, it doesn't increase the footprint of the chair. So when you push the button, you can kind of see it better in this image here. It's going to flip either straight back or straight down and not out to the side at all. And that means somebody can pull right up to a bed for a side transfer, for example. Unlike some of the other styles of knee adductors, we sell some as well, that as you flip it down, the way it flips makes the footprint of the chair wider. So you have to, you might need a foot or two in between your bed and your wheelchair if you're trying to do that side transfer over to it. Now, like with any other knee adductor, though, when your lower extremities are not in optimal alignment, but there is flexibility in the posture, this flip down knee adductor, you can use it to minimize that progression or minimize that abnormal posture. So for individuals with spasticity, they're pretty good at helping to maintain the position of the legs, especially during a tonal event. And then for somebody with like a progressive neurological condition, their legs can start to move into that abduction as they fatigue, and as their condition progresses. Knee adductors can help promote that stability, again, in those lower extremities. So again, the big deal here is that these flip down, straight down out of the way. They stay on the chair. They lock back in place when they're needed, and they're not increasing the overall footprint of that chair as they flip down out of the way. So this design allows these to be adjustable in their home position, right? So where they lock in place is pretty adjustable. You're able to set the overall orientation through one single fastener. The release lever can be positioned in a fore or aft position, whatever's better for that client to access and have it flip the way they need it to flip. We have multiple attachment clamps here. You can span the transition from horizontal to vertical that you have on the leg rests as they radius down and point down towards the floor, or they can mount to the perfectly vertical section, whatever works best, right? And we also have track nuts for quantum and permobile power chairs, so it does work on power chair pretty well as well. We have 2 rod lengths. The idea there is to account for variances in cushion height and mounting position. Your standard is an 8.5-inch long rod, but we also have a 10.5-inch long, and both have the same 2.5-inch offset front to back. They're both made from aluminum to try and keep it lightweight. But with these rods, you can adjust the height and the rotation of the pad. You can cut them down to be shorter if you need, right? If you flip it down out of the way and you have 6 inches rod sticking up in the air, that's maybe not ideal. So you can cut that down. And to make sure that these work for anybody who needs them, we have a couple of different round pad options. We have several rectangular pads to choose from. And those pads can all be adjusted so that the profile matches the profile of the cushion, right? So if you have a cushion that's sloped, you can angle these pads to match that slope, for example. And since they're mounted to a round rod, we can really optimize the contact to the client's leg rather than saying the pad always being in line with the frame, for example. So with all of those little parts and pieces, it makes it super adjustable and versatile and adaptable, right? So we're going to jump on to the next thing and keep it moving here. Our next one I'm pretty excited about is our single point head support. This one is something that we've recently started rolling out in the field. So they're single point. They're a version of our Comfort Plus style head support, which we released in just a couple months ago, late last year. They really streamline the installation and adjustment process massively, right? I know everybody has struggled to get to those 4 screws on the back of the head support. This style uses one single fastener that you access from the top, and it makes it super quick and simple to install or adjust a head pad. So we've had a bolt-on adapter which does this exact same thing for a few years now, but this new pad has that adapter welded directly into the pad. So very, very much an improvement on making those adjustments and things. So the way it works is pretty similar to, we'll call it the legacy style that we sell with the 4 screws that bolt in. That legacy style grabs the ball from the front and the rear, while the single point adapter piece clamps it down from the top and bottom. So there's a socket in the bottom of that single point piece that's about the same as like the split ring that would grab the ball from the rear previously on the legacy style. And there's a plunger in that single point that pushes down from the top to hold it in place. So everything's steel inside of there, so it holds extremely tight, if not a little better than the legacy style. We do have the same hole pattern on this as well, so it's still compatible with all of the swingaway systems, tone deflector, all of those accessories. So you're not losing any compatibility there. You're just gaining the ability to make super easy adjustments, right? So hopefully this video shows well for you guys. Installing it is super simple, as you can see here. You just need to start with that single point nice and loose, and then you can feed your hardware in and tighten it down. That's really about it to that. So there's not much to do there. To adjust it, it's even easier. You just loosen that set screw a little bit. You can make your adjustment and tighten it back down. All right, and now we have this as an option on our Comfort Plus series right now. You can get several of these sizes with embedded egg switches in either right, left, or both sides. And that legacy style is still going to be available for some time. I know internationally it needs to be available for quite some time. So we have both styles. Our current goal, though, is that through this year, we'll continue to add more of our head support series in this style with the integrated single point adjustment feature. And the plan is around this time next year, we'll start moving to only offering this style. So you should start seeing more and more of these headrests with this single point adjustment and throughout the rest of this year. And now the last thing that we have to cover today is going to be the mo-Vis proportional head control. This one is a new one for us here at Stealth. This is a drive control, which controls the chair by movement of the client's head. Right, each pad here contains multiple force sensors, which allows for some fairly unique configurability and drivability. The way this one works is that the harder you push into a pad, the faster it's going to move in that direction. That's true for all directions, right? Forward, reverse, and turns. And with the programming that you can do either through onboard or PC, you can adjust the initial speed of those force sensors so that it responds almost the same as like a digital proximity sensor based head control might. Speaking of programming here, you have the capability to define how much force it takes to start moving in a direction, as well as at which force you reach full speed in that direction. So that's for all three pads. And again, you have an initial speed, so that's how fast the chair moves at that minimum force. So with very, very little effort, you can have the chair creep along super slow, or you can have it start out at like 40 or 50% of the speed in that profile. So for the wheelchair. So there's a few other settings which can be adjusted, but I wanted to take a minute to talk more about two specific ones which are very unique to the mo-Vis proportional head control here. First one is veering. So see, that video is not going to play. So that's cool. So veering is used in the mo-Vis proportional head control to allow the user to press more on the side of that center pad, and the chair will move more in that direction than in a straight line. So this is because there's multiple sensors per pad. So with a very minimal movement of your head, the client can course correct and still stay on a straight line, for example, much easier than in a traditional head control, right? Where before, if I want to course correct or veer, I'm doing both forward and a turn at the same time. We don't have to do that anymore. So now we can't do a full turn in place with this feature. If you set it that high, You would have seen it in the video if I could make it play. It would be pretty hard to drive a straight line. So turns are still primary. You still have to primarily rely on turn pads to make a real turn, but it does make this a very intuitive system to drive. Overload force detection is another function, and what we can do with that is define an allowable force, and if you cross that threshold, you're going to trigger a warning and a stop. So if the client is driving along and they go into a sudden spastic extensor pattern, rather than them pressing on the gas pedal to go faster, the head control actually shuts off and the chair will come to a stop until that client's back in control. So it's a very, very cool safety feature that this head control can do. For our clients who maybe they're driving down the road and they hit a rough patch and that triggers a spasm, this can help them really to avoid a lot of not good scenarios that they might have been forced into before. Oh, now it's going to actually let me play it. So this is your veering feature. This is at 100%, and you can see that is nearly a full turn there, right? So if somebody has decent head control, but maybe they get tired quickly and they can't keep up that force needed with their head or neck, you're looking at more of a digital, proximity-based switched head control. That's usually your way to go. It's efficient, it's going to save energy, it doesn't require much physical effort. But if that person can handle a bit of pressure, they aren't restricted by something like a cervical collar, that's when we can really start looking at these proportional head controls. So it works well for both kids and adults, and those who can manage it lets them manage their chair with movements of the head. So it's really good for somebody who doesn't have much control over their arms or legs, but they do have good head movement, right? So we're thinking high level spinal cord injury, ALS, CP, MS, that kind of client. That said, it's not for everybody here. The user has to be able to bring their head back upright against gravity in that neutral position to stop the chair. They also have to maintain pressure on that head pad to keep it moving. So that can get tiring for somebody, and even long term for certain users could lead to some neck discomfort. So pushing into that head pad increases muscle tone over time, which could make it harder for certain clients with abnormal tone to stop the chair when they need to. So it's great for certain people, but there are some precautions, just like with any drive control. So I went ahead and put this slide here too, just to help it make it clear when somebody might look at traditional head array versus when they might be a good candidate for a proportional head control, right? If somebody has that decent head control, but they still get tired quickly or can't keep up the force needed with their head or neck, a digital proximity array is usually the best fit. And when we say fair head control, we're talking about somebody who they can hold their head upright against gravity for short periods. They can move it a little bit. But they might deal with fatigue or inconsistent strength in their neck, right? On the other hand, though, if the person can handle pushing into the pads with their head, they're not using, again, a cervical collar, proportional is probably a good option for them too. And so in this case, that good head control we have in that little decision tree there, that just means the person has no trouble moving their head through gravity. They can handle a little bit of resistance without issues. So this isn't an all-encompassing decision tree by any means, right? We're omitting a lot of things like chin control, rim control, such, eye gaze, things like that. But I just want to mainly focus on deciding between a traditional head array and a proportional head control here. We do carry a couple of options with this new drive control. Both work with any of the main power chair electronic systems on the market without issue. So there's really no compatibility issues to worry about from that standpoint. We do have the fully proportional option. All three pads are proportional pads here. And we do carry an option where your turns, your left and rights, are replaced with mechanical switches. So this would be a good option for somebody who's just struggling with the turns a bit, but otherwise successful with that proportional head control. Of course, we have a full suite of replacement parts and accessories available and things like that as well. So that does bring us to the end here. Before I open the floor to questions or anything, I do want to remind everybody I'll be sending out a PDF copy of this presentation to everybody who's joined us. I'll get it out to that email you used to register. In that email, I'll also give you a link for a quiz in case you do want a CEC credit for this. And then also just a general survey about today's experience. I do want to make sure that it's worth your time to come to these things and that we're keeping them informative for you. We'll make a recording available on demand again pretty soon, within a week or so, and that'll get on our website and YouTube page, so keep an eye out there. With that though, if you guys have any questions or anything, please type them into the Q&A, type them into the chat. We'll get you some answers. And while we wait for that, I do want to remind you that we do have a webinar next month that's going to cover our mounting solutions, so make sure to check that out. But other than that, let us know if you have any questions. If not, that is everything from me today. I appreciate your time, guys.